Welcome back.
Welcome back, family, to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee,
I'm Curry.
and today we're going to, start our reading of W.E.B. Du Bois, The
Hmm.
Souls of Black Folk. And I want to say once again, as always, thank you to our longtime subscribers who have been with us since the very beginning,
Hmm.
and to our new listeners. Please hit subscribe so that you can get the notifications. And thank you for being here to hear us out.
Thank you for hearing us out. And in our last episode, we did what we usually do when we
Mm-hmm.
start a new book. Like before we read anything or really get into it,
Mm-hmm.
we like to give something of an introduction or reason as to why we want to read, said book.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we gave in the last episode was about, and especially in the fourth thought,
Right.
was trying to uh, elucidate this shared perceptual space we kind of all exist in. Because since the question of race is at the forefront of our discussions, always of our discussions,
Mm-hmm.
but of the, of national discussion now, it seems, like a really good time to revisit this work,
Mm-hmm.
something, and like we said, something that shouldn't be as poignant or as relevant as it is, especially in this day and age. But the fact that it is, and
Mm-hmm.
that it does, it does have a role to play,
Mm-hmm.
in being able to understand, what we're dealing with today
Right.
and how we go about, dealing with it,
Mm-hmm.
is very indicative of where we've come from and where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the forethought, which was the you could say the preface
Mm-hmm.
to what we're going to read today, it was really just W.E.B. Du Bois, laying out his reasoning
Mm-hmm.
and why he wants to write this, and that it's a lot of the ideas that were in the air during the time of him of this
Yeah, this
of this
particular.
particular work
Mm-hmm.
were, to say the least, counterproductive to the type of progress that we need.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the ideas about how we ought to go about being, American, or existing in this new space,
Mm-hmm.
were, like I said, counterproductive to what it was delusion.
Yes.
It wasn't true.
Right.
It wasn't honest. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
very honest take
Mm-hmm.
on where we are and, where we came from in a
Right.
sense.
And W.E.B. Du Bois, I feel felt compelled to lend that type of truthfulness
Hmm.
that was becoming, I don't know, almost like we say, delusional, as if we don't truly grasp what's happening. Pretty much one generation removed from
Hmm.
the change,
Yeah, and it's like
and
we didn't learn the
mm-hmm,
lesson.
mm-hmm,
It wasn't really internal. I guess we could get into that
right,
when in
we,
this
we
particular chapter.
right,
But this is we in the last episode we were thinking that we were going to be able to read, like 5 chapters at a
right,
time and really pick out particular parts and
mm-hmm,
particular chapters that we wanted to highlight.
right,
But in reading the first chapter and just
right,
discussing that to ourselves,
mm-hmm.
we came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be we weren't going to be able to
Yes,
do it like
just because so particularly well in this first chapter, so many of the paragraphs are so encapsulating. They're almost like we said, they're almost like an essay within themselves. So we didn't
like,
feel
yeah,
that we can leave out
each
leave
chapter
out
is kind
leave
of
out
like
anything.
each chapter is like a short story, like a
Uh-huh.
self-contained
Uh-huh.
analysis. So it's like we can't really skim over or
Right.
sum up
Mm-hmm.
any of this. So we've decided that we're going to take it chapter by chapter
Right.
and really going in with a fine-tooth comb and
Mm-hmm.
discussing all of those pieces.
And I really feel, in our in this 21st century where everything is so quick, everything is so microwave. Like I said, everything is reduced to a meme or a particular saying that folks tend to you know they tend not to get into the type of dense material and to really hone in and really go line for line, word for word, things like that, because everything is so quick.
Hmm.
And so I think just bringing that back and going, just trying to appreciate you know everything that's being said versus trying
And
to
but
gloss over
and,
something.
and more than that,
you
it's
know
like nothing. This like you
you
can't
can't miss it.
you can't because it's
Right.
like it's
Uh-huh.
unsummable.
Right.
You can't really just say. And in this chapter, they said this, and there's
Right.
a few things. It's not like Dune. It's not
Right.
like a work of fiction
Hmm.
where you're trying to tell a story
Right.
and just and summing up particular plot points and just getting to the most poignant pieces.
Hmm.
This isn't a story; it's an expose.
Right.
Nothing of it can really just be left out in
Hmm.
a sense. So instead of you know like trying to go back and stuff, like we've
Right.
decided that we're just going to take it
Just chapter
chapter
by
by
chapter.
chapter, and
Right.
it's going to take as long as it's going to take.
Yes, I mean, we plan on being here, so
Yeah.
here we are.
So.
And I hope that our listeners will stay with us.
Hmm.
You know, hopefully, they've been able to get the book themselves, off their shelves, or maybe a PDF or whatever the case may be, and follow along with us. And if they have any comments or anything, that they will leave them in the comment section, and we can address
Yeah.
that. When
As we
that
go
time
along.
comes, as we
So
go along.
yes, this is would be the first official chapter
Mm-hmm.
of the Souls of Black Folks,
Mm-hmm.
and is of our spiritual
Mm-hmm.
strivings. So yeah.
O water, voice of my heart, crying in the sand, all night long crying with a mournful cry, as I lie and listen and cannot understand the voice of my heart in my side, or the voice of the sea. O water, crying for rest, is it I, is it I? All night long the water is crying to me. Unresting water, there shall never be rest till the last moon droop and the last tide fail, and the fire of the end begin to burn in the west. And the heart shall be weary and wonder and cry like the sea, all life long, crying without avail, as the water all night long is crying to me.
Remember, each chapter will start with
Yeah, that type of sermon
yeah,
you mentioned.
with a sorrow song as he
Yes, it's
calls it.
all right. Between me and the other world, there is ever an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it. Oh, nevertheless floundered round it. They approach me in a half hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then, instead of saying directly, "How does it feel to be a problem?" they say, "I know an excellent colored man in my town," or "I fought at Mechanicsville," or "Do not these southern outrages make your blood boil?" At these I smile, or am I interested? Or reduce the boiling to a simmer, as the occasion may require, to the real question: how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word.
So that is the crux,
Hmm.
the question being asked in this particular chapter. How does it feel to be a problem?
Hmm. And yet, being a problem is a strange experience, peculiar even for one who has never been anything else, save perhaps in babyhood and in Europe. It is in the early days of rollicking boyhood that the revelation first burst upon one, all in a day, as it were. I remember well when the shadow swept across me. I was a little thing, away up in the hills of New England, where the dog Housatonic winds between Hoosac and Tajkanik, mm, to the sea, in a wee wooden schoolhouse. Something put it into the boys and girls' head to buy gorgeous visiting cards, to send a package, and exchange. The exchange was merry, till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card, refused it peremptorily, with a glance. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different upon the others.
From.
Oh, that I was different from the others. Alike, mayhap, in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. I had thereafter no desire to tear down the veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt, and lived above it in the region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. That sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years all this fine contempt began to fade, for the worlds I longed for and all their dazzling opportunities were theirs, not mine. But they should not keep these prizes, I said. Some, all, I will wrest from them.
So yeah, I want to stop right here for a
Mm-hmm.
moment and kind of discuss
Mm-hmm.
this opening salvo.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, let's not forget that the question being posed to us
Right.
is
How
how
does
does
it
it feel
feel
to
to be
be
a
a problem?
mm-hmm.
And so far he's talked about the first time he realized he was a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what it made him feel was competitive,
Mm-hmm.
if you could say. Um, or what I've written, it felt good for him to circumvent
Mm-hmm.
the ideal of what he was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, he the sky. Let me go back. Let's see. Uh,
The
that
sky.
sky was
Mm-hmm.
bluest when
Mm-hmm.
I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy
Stringy heads. That's
heads.
right.
You know, so he knew what was expected of him,
Mm-hmm.
and he took delight
Mm-hmm.
in being able to circumvent that,
Mm-hmm.
and in being smarter and being
Mm-hmm.
better, being
Mm-hmm.
stronger, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to beat
Right.
them. So he took a wry pleasure, you could
Mm-hmm.
say, in being the problem
Mm-hmm.
and forcing them to
To deal with him.
or lose
Alludes to
to him
him.
to
Right.
show that they were no better than the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But after all of that, the white hot heat
Right.
of just being able of existing in that, and having that,
Mm-hmm.
it shows that it's not enough,
Right.
right? Because it fades,
Good.
like he says, it fades, and all you're left with is that longing. You say at first he tried to ignore their world, and
Mm-hmm.
that it was commonplace. So
Mm-hmm.
he when he was presented with the veil
Mm-hmm.
of this, or you could say the iron curtain,
Right.
right, that has dropped over his life that he could not penetrate.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't even want to go through it.
Right.
I didn't want to penetrate it. I don't want to know what's on the other side.
Right.
Because everything over there is small and
Mm-hmm.
corrupt and perverse, and none of it is meant for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Your word is wrong. My word
That's
is right.
right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right. But after all of that, just is this pervasive longing,
Mm-hmm.
because all of the goals of his life
Mm-hmm.
exists on the other side of that veil,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being able to pierce it,
Mm-hmm.
being like to truly find success, to truly find meaning and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. In this life
Yeah, those
lies on the other
opportunities.
side of the veil, right?
Right.
Him trying to get into that and knowing that that is not meant for him,
Right.
kind of infects and it kind of imparts
Mm-hmm.
this intense longing.
Yeah, those opportunities are on the other side. I am going to wrest them from you.
Hmm.
Take them if need be. That's pretty
But
much
yeah,
what
but
how he
he's
is.
saying that you can have that type of mentality,
Right.
right? That's the one that he had to
Had.
begin with,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it didn't win him anything.
Yeah.
It didn't get him anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you can be smarter,
Mm-hmm.
you can be stronger and
Right.
faster, but
Yep.
that's not what this question
Yeah.
is. You're black.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how smart you
That's
are,
right.
right?
Doesn't matter how you beat them.
Yeah, it doesn't
Right.
matter if you even beat
Beat
them,
them.
because there's one thing that you
Can't
cannot
do
beat,
right. Mm-hmm.
and that is your blackness,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where this veil comes from. It's
Right.
not your intelligence. It's
Right.
not, there may be, the frail justification that
Mm-hmm.
they use to try to justify what
Right.
this is, but it is quite simply you are black.
Yeah. That's it.
That's what this is.
Mm-hmm. Just how I would do it, I could never decide. By reading law, by healing the sick, by telling the wonderful tales that swam in my head. Some way, with other black boys, the strife was not so fiercely sunny. Their youth shrunk into tasteless cacophony, or into silent hatred of the pale world about them and mocking distrust of everything white, or wasted itself in a bitter cry. Why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in my own house? The shades of the prison house closed around about us all, walls straight and stubborn to the widest, but relentlessly narrow, tall and unscalable to sons of night who must plod darkly on in resignation, or beat unavailing palms against the stone, or steadily, half hopelessly, watch the streak of blue above.
Mm.
That's pretty much what you had already,
Yeah.
that here it is. How is it that you can become when you're when you're stuck in when you're stuck in the B,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're black, and how is it that you're able to move? And in some cases, you know, because we are stuck in this place, we fall into that pit of misery at times. Like why do this to me? Why,
Because,
you
like you
know,
said, the wall is unscalable.
scalable. Mm-hmm.
You can't go around it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this veil
Right.
is. It is meant to divide.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way around it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a part of him, or that believed at one point that he could go around it,
That's right.
that he might be able to outsmart it,
Mm-hmm.
or win it,
Right.
through law, through being
Mm-hmm.
a doctor, through being something,
Mm-hmm.
something that allows him to show at least himself
Right.
that he can beat,
Mm-hmm.
the veil.
Right.
But you can try and try, but like that's not what this comes from.
Yeah.
It's not a question of occupation.
That's right.
You know, it is a question of skin
Skin.
color.
Mm-hmm.
You are black.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a doctor. You can be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a president.
Right.
You can be, God
Right.
Almighty.
Right.
But inside
Of
of
this.
this
Uh-huh.
particular frame of thought,
Mm-hmm.
inside of this, perceptual basis, there is nothing that you can do
Mm-hmm.
that will be able to circumvent what they see you
Right.
as black,
Mm-hmm.
period. Right? And it's not like we're not black.
Mm-hmm.
But understand that this particular blackness, so this veil, right, is a social construct created by them
That's right.
and reinforced by, their cultural basis
Mm-hmm.
and their laws and all that stuff. Right? That's what this is. That's what I mean by being black.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In this particular
Yeah.
context.
Right.
It is that social structure that has been inflicted, forced upon you. You have to live in that particular space.
Mm-hmm.
In there, it's the same thing with James Baldwin.
Yeah.
We talked about when we read his
Uh-huh.
little thing about you can only be so much in that particular world
Mm-hmm.
because nothing you do is going to be able to
Right.
override
That's
your
right.
blackness.
Mm-hmm. In
Right?
in their view. Right.
In their view.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do as much as you want. You can
Mm-hmm.
outperform, outpace all that stuff, but you're still going to be black.
Right.
So it's like how, like you said, it's what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
How can I even get around this? It's like like you said, half hopelessly watching streak of the blue above. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just look at the sky
Yeah.
and think that it's impossible
Possible. Mm-hmm.
because it is.
Mm-hmm.
When
In
you're
this frame, it
competing,
is.
yeah,
Right.
when in that particular framework,
Mm-hmm.
when you're competing in that particular framework, or just competing in general
Mm-hmm.
with those ideals, there is no winning.
Right.
Because nothing you can do is going to change that one assailable fact about you.
Yeah.
That you are black.
Right. After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro is sort of a seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world, It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One never feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder.
Mm.
You know, it's one of the things, the double consciousness.
Mm.
I think that thought has been lost for at least 60 years of what it is that Du Bois had originally stated. He doesn't say that in order to survive that you have to have a double consciousness. He's just telling you this is just
That's what it is.
that's what it is.
To exist in this context,
Yes.
you're caught between two unreachable extremes.
Right.
Right. I think the way we described it is what you are, your born self and your imposed self.
Right.
Right. He called it the American and the Negro.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ideals of being an American, right, of the freedom
Mm-hmm.
and the unassailable rights and
Right.
all these things are incompatible with the ideal of being black.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But you are an American.
Right.
And you're black.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have what you are born as and what you're imposed to be.
That's right.
These two things, like you said, are incompatible,
Mm-hmm.
unreconcilable. And the only reason why they don't destroy each other, destroy each other,
Mm-hmm.
or destroy the person existing in that context is through a sheer force of will.
Mm-hmm.
Right? These two things are. These two things are, like I said before when we were discussing, it's like the two opposite ends of a magnet.
Mm-hmm.
They negate each other. And so that double consciousness is that imposed self is merely just a reflection or a consequence
Mm-hmm.
of what you're not.
Right.
It's like the dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's an absence of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And being black, right, in this idea, like I said, in this particular structure, framework here, is you are the living embodiment of everything that you are not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like when we were discussing before, when you're born with questions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Of who am I? What is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
What am I meant to be? And all that stuff. Right? But that is twofold, right, for black people,
mm-hmm.
because not only do we have those questions of our birth,
right,
we also have the question of what we are meant to be in this particular social structure,
mm-hmm.
right? And make no mistake, that is what we're living in
mm-hmm.
to this very day.
Yeah.
It may not be stated as confrontationally as it was in his time, right? It might be try to be dressed over with frilly language and stuff like that, but that is what we are existing in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the problem, the problem
that we are still,
of today is the problem of the color line. Mm-hmm. It has not changed. Right? Because we are there, it's irreconcilable. Mm-hmm. There cannot be, the American
mm-hmm.
and black.
That's right.
Because these two things are polar opposites. And like we said before, it creates this negative space mm-hmm. in which nothing exists.
Yes.
Nothing can thrive there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter like what you build yourself up to be mm-hmm. or what you build up around you. It mm-hmm. erodes it. It emaciates it. Mm-hmm. It innervates it. Inverts it. Mm-hmm. Whatever that word means, that makes it sickly.
Right.
It makes it thin.
Yeah.
It kills it.
Yeah.
Nothing can live. Uh-huh. Literally, only nothing can exist in that space. Mm-hmm. So whatever you put there will be rendered into nothing.
Right. It will die.
It can't
even exist, let alone to die.
Because
right.
It is too unreconcilable
Mm-hmm.
polar opposites being held together by sheer force of will,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you can't be black,
Mm-hmm.
right? In, like, in this particular structure,
Right.
you can't be black and an American.
That's right. And that's the problem that we're dealing with even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
That we are being confronted with today in the 21st century. We see what's happening, you know, in DC with the voting and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We see that. We even before that it's always been this force of black
Mm-hmm.
and American. There is no coming together of those two. And that's the thing that we have been trying to put together, but that which is
But it's
ahead of us is
unreconcilable.
solvable. They can't
They can't
come
go
together.
together.
Right. They don't go together. They can't exist together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bitter pill. That's
Being
the
black,
problem. That's the
like I
bitter
said,
pill. That's the
being
problem.
black makes you un-American.
That's right.
But you are an American.
Right.
And you are black.
Mm-hmm.
These two things, like I said, are true.
There's no
Right?
denying that. Yeah. Right.
Right? They're provable.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't necessarily true.
True. Right.
And we
The
don't,
proof. Yeah.
try to
We
amend
tried to
that
have
statement.
that. Right.
Right?
We had the conversation before. Right.
Because really, you're not American and you're
Mm-hmm.
not black.
Mm-hmm.
These two things were created rather, recently.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't real.
Mm-hmm.
What you really are is a human being,
Mm-hmm.
right? Forced to enforce, I'm going to use, in
Yeah.
quotation marks, forced to exist in a particular context,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be American
Or
or
black.
black,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, in our case, it's both,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or whatever other social, structure, whatever, another cultural identity we create for ourselves. None
Mm-hmm.
of it is actually real.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just an act. All of us are trying to be that thing, trying
Mm-hmm.
to be a man,
Right.
trying to be a woman,
Mm-hmm.
trying to be good, trying to be bad. But
Mm-hmm.
in trying, it's all just performative,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing is able to truly supersede or escape that one, primordial part of yourself that
Mm-hmm.
is just you,
Mm-hmm.
that cannot be dressed up,
Right.
that cannot be performed. It's just you.
Mm-hmm.
But we have these two contexts in which we are forced, and I'm not going to use
Right.
quotations for that,
Right.
quotations for that, are forced to exist in.
Mm-hmm.
The American
Mm-hmm.
and the Negro,
Mm-hmm.
right? Both of it is just, like I said, both of it isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
But these are two identities that have been inflicted upon us.
Right.
That we have to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. And we
right?
know how that came
And
to
it's
be. Right.
and it's a zero sum game.
Mm-hmm.
There is no, like I said, it's nothing. Nothing can exist in that space.
Mm-hmm.
It's unreconcilable, right? So, is what do you do about that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty much this particular thing is restating the first
Yeah.
problem. How does it feel to be
Be
the
a problem.
problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what do you do about existing in this unreconcilable place?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
All right. Here we go to answer that question. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world and Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American, without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face.
So that paragraph is pretty much
Yeah.
the whole thing we just talked about.
Right. This, then, is the end of his striving to be a co worker in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation, to husband and use his best powers and his latent genius. These powers of body and mind have in the past been strangely wasted, dispersed, or forgotten. The shadow of the mighty Negro past flits through the tale of Ethiopia and the shadow and Ethiopia the shadowy and of Egypt the Sphinx. Throughout history, the powers of single black men flash here and there like falling stars and die sometimes before the world has rightly gauged their brightness. Here in America, in the few days since emancipation, the black man's turning hither and thither in hesitant and doubtful striving has often made his very strength to lose effectiveness, to seem like absence of power, like weakness. And yet, it is not weakness. It is the contradiction of double aims. The double aim struggle of the black artisan. On the one hand, to escape white contempt for a nation of mere hewers of wood and drawers of water, and on the other hand, to plow and nail and dig for a poverty stricken horde, could only result in making him a poor craftsman, for he had but half a heart in either cause. By the poverty and ignorance of his people, the Negro minister or doctor was tempted toward quackery and demagoguery, and by the criticism of the other world towards ideals that made him ashamed of his lowly task. The would-be black savant was confronted by the paradox that the knowledge his people needed was a twice told tale to his white neighbors, while the knowledge which would teach the white world was Greek to his own flesh and blood.
Mm.
Whew.
So, yeah, this particular, this is when he's kind of,
Yeah, it's about
we're
to.
getting into the meat.
Yeah, we're getting it right.
But like we said before, is that in that unreconcilable space, nothing can exist. And he's pretty much talking about how black people were kind of set up for failure to begin with, right? How those things that are innate in that black culture outside of this particular context. In that, and when I mean black, I mean like everything that we have been African, right? In that particular cultural basis, everything within that space that is innate in his blood, right, is invaluable.
You're right, invaluable.
Invaluable to his current predicament, or invaluable to that would you say European context he's existing.
Right.
It doesn't value that.
Right.
It tells you, it says that you are nothing but it can't even recognize that cultural basis that you have. But like you said, it flits through. We know what we're capable of.
Right.
We know the greatness within us, Ethiopia and Egypt and all the things we've accomplished before. We know that we are capable, quote unquote, of civilization, right? But it is unrecognizable,
right, in
this particular context, right? Because like we said in our episode, a lot of what our societies in Africa were a direct, response, refutation of this type of world. A lot of the things that we did, the way we ordered ourselves, was to make sure it didn't end up like this.
We were intentional in that, right?
Yeah, but when they looked at it, it was like, you don't have roads, you don't have giant buildings, and you don't have all these things. You must not have hit these particular marks and are incapable of hitting them.
Right.
All this stuff. Right. But those, so those values and those things that are innate in our system are invaluable in this system. And so,
they have no value.
They have no value
in this system.
In this particular system. And so you're like, all right, so now you have to exist and do something that is valuable in this system. Right. But everything that has been given to you is to be, aren't jobs that you are meant to take pride in.
That's right.
They're the things that you've been relegated to do.
That's right.
To
the lowly positions, right.
To reinforce this idea of what you are to them.
So no wonder.
So it's like,
no wonder
you can't take pride in your work, and you can't act upon that instinctual basis of knowledge that you do have. So the only thing that you can be is a poor craftsman.
Right.
right? Or open to quackery and demagoguery,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't, because everything that you have inside of you
Mm-hmm.
is of no value
Right.
to this
To this,
current
but yeah, to this
perceptual
with
basis,
faces, right?
right? And everything that you are taught is meant to relegate you
Mm-hmm.
to just that one place,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can't, like, you're set up for failure.
Right.
Nothing that you have, nothing that has been given, and nothing that you have innately in you, right? It can take you outside of that negative space,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when he talked about the black genius or the black savant,
Savant, right? Mm-hmm.
right, and how these a black savant, like we talked about yesterday, that being a genius in the black community
Mm-hmm.
is different from being a genius like in the white community,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because being a genius in our world
Mm-hmm.
means being able to not ignore.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ignore your blackness,
Right.
and I mean the black as a social structure that is inflicted on us. You can't ignore that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's being able to utilize it or go beyond it in a way that is constructive to this new cultural
Mm-hmm.
basis, right? That is a combination of what we were and what we're trying to be,
Mm-hmm.
and and what we are.
Right.
It's these three things:
Mm-hmm.
our past, present, and future,
Mm-hmm.
kind of melding together to
Together.
create this new person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what a black genius lends themselves
Mm-hmm.
toward. Like we said, like, it's not that we're incapable of being an Einstein. That we
Mm-hmm.
not like we can't do math.
Mm-hmm.
We know
Yeah.
that's not the
Yeah. That would
case.
right.
But the conversation that we're having,
Mm-hmm.
is not one of uh, not one that is solely of a physical reality.
Mm-hmm.
We're not solely trying to describe, the physical phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
of the world we're existing in. What the conversation that we're having
Mm-hmm.
is one of identity, is one of
Mm-hmm.
self actualization,
Mm-hmm.
and laying that path, like much like scientists contributing to that conversation, is not the act of a single person,
Right.
right? Einstein built upon the work of all his predecessors,
Mm-hmm.
right? Tesla built upon the work of all his predecessors, and people, scientists today are building upon the work of them. No one's ever doing it alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no lone figure that is just going to be able to make it all click. You're
Right.
just working from that shared
Mm-hmm.
basis, and it's the same thing we're doing, but it's a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder because it's not. There's no. You can't just read a textbook and get the mathematical language and just
Mm-hmm.
know what to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a lot more instinctual than that because
Mm-hmm.
we are born like with this generational trauma, born in this imposed, relegated space
Mm-hmm.
that we have to contend with,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no right answer in contending with
Mm-hmm.
that space. We just know that we have to contend with it.
Right. Our genius is questioned, and I'm not saying that the others aren't questioned either, but we tend to we tend to question it, you know, and as if you know our genius has to be verified in a particular way because for some strange reason we don't think that it goes together. I mean, I even remember this was a few years ago, and I was talking about something in regards to African history,
Mm.
and the guy comes in and he questions me and he says that he wants me to provide white people like their opinions or whatever. He doesn't want it from me, a black person, quoting black people, because you know he didn't trust
Mhm.
he didn't trust what I was saying. So I needed to verify it from you know from white people, and I just looked at him like he was like you're an idiot. I didn't even. I just stopped talking, stopped engaging, because that's what happens with us. Almost at almost in anything, almost at any level, is that if we can't
once again, we're seeing that incompatibility.
Yes.
That what we're speaking from is incompatible with
Mm-hmm.
how the conversation
Right.
is meant to be had.
Mm-hmm.
So something is always lost in translation.
Yeah.
But now you have an even more frayed framework
Mm-hmm.
that colors and perverts those things that you're trying to say. It twists them and makes them not what you mean,
Right.
right? Because what we're speaking from isn't compatible
That's right.
with,
That's right.
what we're speaking with
Right.
and who we're speaking to.
Mm-hmm. And so,
So yeah,
yeah.
and like you said, that it's to them this particular, but it's not a question of value. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
question of which one is better or more valuable
Right.
and stuff
Right.
like that. It's just understanding where we're
We're.
coming
Mm-hmm.
from and what we're relegated to be
Mm-hmm.
and what it is to them. Like it says, it's Greek to their blood and bone.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how flesh and blood?
Well.
Flesh
Mm-hmm.
and blood.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is second nature to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is their cultural
Right.
basis, right? And it's not invaluable, like you said, before, right? Because our wish is to be able to contribute to that conversation
Mm-hmm.
in some way, right? And because we know that there's a conversation here,
Right.
but the thing is, we're only being given so much to speak with,
That's right.
and we can't really speak with our voices. We
Mm-hmm.
can only speak with the voice that was, imposed
Pulls
upon
upon us.
us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're trying to marry that voice inside of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right, with this, what's been imposed upon. And then
Mm-hmm.
now that it's not impossible to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it is improbable.
Yeah. I was just about to say that, like the likelihood
The
of
likelihood
that, right?
of being
Right,
able
doing
to,
something like that.
to be able to marry both these things, because they also, incompatible. They
Mm-hmm.
also
Yeah.
opposite,
Yeah.
right? But it's not alien. It's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this society is any different from any other one that we've ever existed in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because yes, a lot of African society was a refutation of what civilization is, but Egypt wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Egypt was a contemporary. Ethiopia was a contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
We have our empires.
Right.
We have kings. We aren't incapable
Right.
of speaking in this language or engaging in this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not that we're incapable, but the
Mm-hmm.
thing is that how can how can this cultural voice lend toward this our cultural voice
Mm-hmm.
lend toward their cultural
Mm-hmm.
voice, right? How do we do that? How do we get there? And it's like when you're existing in that space, especially, and you're only speaking with that voice that's forced on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's well, if you're only speaking from that, then it is patently impossible.
Right.
It's not meant, because
Right.
that voice isn't meant to communicate,
That's right.
right? That voice is meant to say yes sir, no sir,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. The innate love of harmony and beauty that set the root of souls of his people a dancing and a singing, raised but confusion and doubt in the soul of the black artist. For the beauty revealed to him was the soul beauty of a race which his larger audience despised. He could not articulate the message of another people. This waste of double aim, this seeking to satisfy two unreconciled ideals, has wrought sad havoc with the courage and faith and deeds of 10,000 people, has sent them often wooing false gods and invoking false means of salvation, and at times has even seemed about to make them ashamed of themselves. Away back in the days of bondage, they thought to see in one divine event the end of all doubt and disappointment. Few men ever worshiped freedom with half such unquestioning faith as did the American Negro for 2 centuries. To him, so far as thought and dream, slavery was indeed the sum of all villainies, the cause of all sorrow, the root of all prejudice. Emancipation was the key to a promised land of sweeter beauty than ever stretched before the eyes of wearied Israelites. And song and exhortation swelled one refrain: liberty. And in his tears and curses, the God he implored had freedom in his right hand. At last it came, suddenly, fearfully, like a dream. With one wild carnival of blood and passion came the message in his own plaintive cadence. Shout, O children, shout you're free, for God has brought you liberty. Years have passed away since then 10, 20, 40. 40 years of national life, 40 years of renewal and development, and yet the swarthy spectral sits in its accustomed seat at the nation's feast. In vain do we cry to this our vastest social problem. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. The nation has not yet found peace with its sins. The freedom has not yet
Freedom.
yet the freedman has not yet found in freedom his promised land. Whatever of good may have come in these years of change, the shadow of a deep disappointment rests upon the Negro people. A disappointment all the more bitter because the unattained ideal was unabounded, save by the simple ignorance of a lowly people.
Mm.
We understand, and so does Du Bois, that we wanted to get out of the chain. We wanted to get from under that whip, that slavery, that sin was the
The
cause
sum
of
of
the
all
sum of
villainies.
all the villainies, of all the problems. And once we was released from it, that things would sort of fall into place and we would move in a particular way and the country move and everything will come to fruition. And here we are still not. And even like he mentioned, like it was 40 years, 30, 40 years after. The disappointment. We were freed. We were let go, but we were not free.
Like, emancipation is not freedom.
Right.
The big thing is because the nation has not yet found peace from its sins.
Mm-hmm.
The freed man has not yet found in freedom his promised land.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he ain't free.
That's right. That's right.
He may be emancipated,
Mm-hmm.
but he is not
free.
free.
Mm-hmm.
In this country, no one is.
Mm-hmm.
Because now what we're contending with is the identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because you may not be a slave, but you are still black.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said, it was never a question of occupation.
Right. Right. That's correct.
So you may not, you may not be on the plantation anymore, but you still have that imposed self.
Mm-hmm.
You're still existing in that space.
That's right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you say that freedom wasn't all it was cracked up to be, because you weren't free.
Free, that's right.
Not in the way that matters most. Not from that thing.
Yeah, not from that framework that is
that
still
put you there.
Put you there.
So that space has changed, but it's still that space. It's still that relegated corner of the greater whole, right? But it is the cornerstone.
Right.
It is the one in which the whole greater whole is built upon, right? Upon the other, right? Because you can say the inverse of being black, being white, is everything that you're not.
Right.
And so it's a zero-sum game for all of us in here. But
here it is, that disappointment.
That disappointment in knowing, in at least the cursory knowledge, I guess during this time, that emancipation was not freedom. That what you were emancipated from, right, was only a byproduct of a greater problem.
That's right. That's the word, problem. Right.
That slavery was a byproduct of a mental illness that is pervasive in this world, in this type of society.
The problem that you can't hide, you can't outrun, you can't mask.
That is the veil.
That's the veil. You can't you're black.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all. The that's your blackness has been framed as the problem,
Mm-hmm.
not you know slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the like we say the byproduct. The byproduct. The problem in this frame is that you are black.
Mm-hmm.
So the Negro, in this case, that's the term. Being freed because at
Emancipate.
first, because
Emancipate.
emancipated, right? That's what you because we were thinking that was the issue. Slavery is the issue, and it's not that it wasn't the issue.
Yeah, for us,
For
yes, it
us,
was
yes,
very
it
much
was very much
the issue.
the issue. But then come to find out that there is an issue that you are not freed from.
That
Black.
goes beyond,
That goes beyond.
you know,
It goes beyond.
economic benefit.
That's right. And that's
You are black.
you are black.
You are the living representation
Mm-hmm.
of the other
As in this framework.
in this
In
particular
this
framework.
framework.
Yeah.
The first decade was merely a prolongation of the vain search for freedom. The boon that seemed ever barely to elude their grasp, like the tantalizing will o' the whips, maddening and misleading the headless host. The Holocaust of war, the terror of the Ku Klux Klan, the lies of carpetbaggers, the disorganization of industry, and the contradictory advice of friends and foes left the bewildered serf with no new watchword beyond the old cry for freedom. As the time flew, however, he began to grasp a new idea. The ideal of liberty demanded for its attainment powerful means, and these the 15th Amendment gave him. The ballot, which before he had looked upon as a visible sign of freedom, he now regarded as the chief means of gaining and perfecting the liberty with which war was partially endowed,
Had.
had partially endowed him. And why not? Had not votes made war and emancipated millions? Had not votes enfranchised the freedmen? Was anything impossible to a power that had done all this? A million black men started with renewed zeal to vote themselves into the kingdom. So the decade flew away. The revolution of 1876 came and left the half free serf weary, wondering, but still inspired. Slowly but steadily. In the following years, a new vision began gradually to replace the dream of political power. A powerful movement, the rise of another ideal to guide the unguided, another pillar of fire by night after a clouded day. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity, born of compulsory ignorance, to know and test the power of the Kabbalistic letters, of the white man, the longing to know. Here at last seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged, but straight, leading to heights high enough to overlook life. Up the new path the advanced guarded toil, slowly, heavily, doggedly. Only those who have watched and guided the faltering feet, the misty minds, the dull understandings of the dark pupils of these schools know how faithfully, how piteously this people strove to learn. It was weary work. The cold statistician wrote down the inches of progress here and there, noted also where here and there a foot had slipped or someone had fallen. To the tired climbers, the horizon was ever dark, the mists were often cold, the canyon was always dim and far away. If, however, the vistas disclosed as yet no goal, no resting place, little but flattery and criticism, the journey at least gave leisure for reflection and self examination. It changed the child of emancipation to the youth with dawning self consciousness, self realization, self respect. In those somber forests of his striving, his own soul rose before him, and he saw himself darkly as through a veil, and yet he saw in himself some faint revelation of his power, of his mission. He began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in the world, he must be himself and not another. For the first time, he sought to analyze the burden he bore upon his back, the dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty, without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings, and had entered into competition with rich landed skilled neighbors. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is that very bottom of hardship. He felt the weight of his ignorance, not simply of letters, but of life, of business, of the humanities. The accumulated sloth and shirking and awkwardness of decades and centuries shackled his hands and feet. Nor was his burden all poverty and ignorance. The red stain of bastardy, which 2 centuries of systematic legal defilement of Negro women had stamped upon his race, meant not only the loss of ancient African chastity, but also the hereditary weight of a mass of corruption from white adulterers, threatening almost the obliteration of the Negro home.
Mm.
I mean, he's just laying.
Yeah,
He's laying the wood here.
This is a roadmap. This is what we're
it.
on.
This is it right here.
We then came the second understanding
That's
of
right.
our problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right after we've realized that emancipation wasn't freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Right, we thought, what can we do?
Right.
Right. Well, we're going to vote.
That's right.
How about that?
That's right.
Because, like he said, wasn't it a vote that started this war,
Mm-hmm.
that led to our emancipation?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't this vote which led to the Freedmen's Bureau
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
We can use this vote to like I said, vote our way into the kingdom.
That's right.
To vote our way outside
Mm-hmm.
of this, imposed corner of reality
Mm-hmm.
in which we're forced to exist in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But how then to utilize that?
Right.
How do we utilize this vote? How do we utilize this?
Mm-hmm.
Then came, say, the book learning.
The education, right?
The education.
That's right. You have to learn.
And that, how can we take a people who have been, illiterate, forced, into illiteracy for generations, for
forced into
centuries.
Ignorance, right? Mm-hmm.
How do we take that, and turn that into learned people?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's through tireless, thankless work.
Mm-hmm.
Through work and work and work. You
Mm-hmm.
read, and it's like I said, you measure it inch by inch by inch, but it is progress.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And it was through
that.
Mm-hmm.
It was through that where we were able to take this language and make it ours, in a sense. Because then is when we started to gain a sense of how did they put it? Self-consciousness, self-realization, and self-respect. We were able to describe our problems, put names to them in our way, with our words. This language may not be ours, but this language, the one that we use to describe this relegated space, that one is ours. And we can, communicate with this one.
Right. Because he even says, for the first time, he sought to analyze the burden he bore upon his back, the dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because that's when we started to realize that being black was more than our issue.
That's
it
right.
was the issue. And this issue hung on this entire cultural impetus. That the Negro problem isn't just the Negro problem. It is the problem.
Right.
It is the problem facing the world, facing our societies to this day. In that, like we talked about, in the Afrocentricity, recontextualize, is that you're trying to optimize, you're trying to make efficient that part of humanity that you can profit from, the contribution. And in doing that, you ignore the whole of what a human being is. Understand that the prejudice that we deal with and the, this imposed double consciousness that we have is meant to reinforce a business.
Right.
A bottom line.
It's a profit. It's about the profit,
right? And it propagates and say that may not be, the reason why we're here. The reason why we're here is, like you said, it's more than economical, right? But how we're utilized in this space, right? And what this space means to them is an economical issue.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we're here is because we're black. Period.
Period.
Right? Because we're not them.
That's right.
As far as they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But how they use the space and what this space means to them is an economical issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the Negro problem is the problem of the modern day economical mental illness of profit and of capitalism and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You take that as you will.
Yeah.
So and I loved how he talks about like how the Negro home was even obliterated in this time where not even your wife was yours.
Right.
Not even your children was yours. All these things led to further reinforce the splintering of this internal consensus we find ourselves, creating. Right. But none of it was good enough.
Yes. Right. A people thus handicapped ought not to be asked. Let me read this again.
You start over.
Yeah, I'm gonna start over again. Yeah, because a people thus handicapped ought not to be asked to race with the world, but rather allowed to give all its time and thought to its own social problems. Highlight it, circle it, put stars around it.
Because that is
that's it.
That is the issue of our time.
That's right.
For us. It's not about being able to compete in their world.
And we shouldn't even be asked to. We should not be asked to compete in a world that was set up for us to fail in the first place. You're asking a people who were enslaved by the whip and the chain, okay, who were maybe 30, 40 years, quote unquote, emancipated. Even now.
Still operating. Right.
We're still operating. You can't. The idea of us catching up, closing a wealth gap, an educational gap, or any gap. It is insane to ask a people.
Ask that of us.
To require that of us.
We can't close that gap.
We can't close that gap.
You can't. That's your problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because
our problem is the social one.
Yes.
That is the one where all of our energies should be, put toward.
Right. And we should be allowed to do this in the space and the time that we set to do it. If it takes us, I don't know, however long to solve a particular issue, then damn it, that's just how long it takes for us to do it. We should not be measured against any other people,
any other metric
in
this system designed for us to fail.
Right. Because our issue that has been put to us by another people, y'all haven't put it, at least not to us, not to anyone else. So to say that another group or another whoever, that they're doing better or whatever, that has nothing to do. It's irrelevant to our issue. And stop making it seem as if it is, because it isn't. And so we should be allowed the time and the space that we need to grow, and not to compete with those who've already been ahead in the competition, who set forth the rules or the rules of this game,
who have rigged and continue to rig the game. Right.
You're always changing the rules. So there is no way to close this gap. At least not this way. It's not meant to be closed. It's meant to have that space. So since it's meant to have it, let's have it.
And if you want that space to be closed, it's not. We can't do it.
Right. It's not the obligation.
Because the whole thing is meant for us to be back here, to ask us to then catch up with you to close that gap. It's impossible.
Right. And it's bullshit.
if this gap is artificial.
Right.
It's what you put there.
Right.
If you want this to disappear,
then you need to write.
That's your work.
That's your work. That's not ours. And and like I said, I'm saying this at the turn of the 20th century. And we're saying it now, 20 plus years into the 21st century. This is not our problem. You have made it ours, but it's not. This is your making. So you have to clean this up if you want to, but that's a whole other.
Why would you say you want progress?
Yeah,
that's what that means.
Right. Then you have to do it. And see, even James Baldwin even mentioned, anytime there's a progress, it's how you move. It's not how we move.
Well, on that end.
On that end.
Yeah.
But alas, while sociologists gleefully count his bastards and his prostitutes, the very soul of the toiling, sweating black man is darkened by the shadow of a vast despair. Men call the shadow prejudice, and learnedly explain it as the natural defense of culture against barbarism, learning against ignorance, purity against crime, the higher against the lower races. To which the Negro cries, Amen, and swears that to so much of his strange prejudice as is founded on just homage to civilization, culture, righteousness, and progress, he humbly bows and meekly does, what's the word?
Obeisance.
Obeisance. Right. But before that nameless prejudice that leaps beyond all this, he stands helpless, dismayed, and well nigh speechless. Before that personal disrespect and mockery, the ridicule and systematic humiliation, the distortion of fact, and wanton license of fancy, the cynical ignoring of the better and the boisterous welcoming of the worse, the all-pervading desire to inculcate disdain for everything black, from Toussaint to the devil. Before this, there rises a sickening despair that will disarm and discourage any nation save the black host, to whom discouragement is an unwritten word. Time playing with y'all. Okay. But the facing is so vast a prejudice could not but bring the inevitable self-questioning, self-disparagement, and lowering of ideals, which ever accompany repression and breed in an atmosphere of contempt and hate. Whispering importance came borne upon the four winds. Lo, we are diseased and dying, cried the dark host. We cannot write. Our voting is vain. What need of education since we must always cook and serve?
Yeah. And that's the one, like I said, so in that environment,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, of humiliation, of systemic humiliation,
Right.
where you are ignored,
Mm-hmm.
where everything is meant is your personal failing.
Right.
We do what we always do. We turn back and look at ourselves,
Ourselves.
right? And we use that metric to then guide ourselves once
Mm-hmm.
again. Because
Mm-hmm.
what else can we do with
Right.
it, right? And it does what it's meant to do. It
Mm-hmm.
undercuts. It destroys.
Mm-hmm.
It's the no thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's that negative space once again infecting and eroding
Mm-hmm.
any, you know, any step that we've taken toward that,
Mm-hmm.
that future that we
Mm-hmm.
want for ourselves. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's always we go we internalize. We start blaming ourselves.
because
And
what
then
else can we do?
what else can we do?
Because you're in this system where
Mm-hmm.
you know what you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know you can do it, but it's like you can't perform.
Mm-hmm.
You know you're smart, but you only ever get an F.
Right.
What can you do? What other thing can you possibly think that I must be an idiot?
Mm-hmm.
I must not be as smart as I think I am.
Mm-hmm.
This must not be meant for me,
Mm-hmm.
or I must have. You start to self
Right.
regulate. I can only exist in these
That's
particular
right.
corners. I can only
Right.
exist in that particular
Right.
space. What's good is education.
Mm-hmm. And everything.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just going to be a cook or whatever.
Right.
You start to do that, and that's what it's meant to do.
Yeah, my voting is in vain. I vote, and then these politicians, they come in and they turn face and do whatever. Everything is always,
Mm-hmm.
it always collapses.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're taking 10 steps, and come to find out you're back 12,
Mm-hmm.
because now you're blaming yourself. You're blaming yourself for not being able to operate in a system that was designed for you to fail from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And the space that you're trying to occupy is a space that's unreconcilable.
Yeah.
And the nation echoed and enforced this self-criticism, saying, be content to be servants, and nothing more. What need of higher culture for half men? Away with the black man's ballot, by force or fraud, and behold the suicide of a race. Nevertheless, out of the evil came something of good, the more careful adjustment of education to real life, the clear perception of the Negro's social responsibilities, and the sober realization of the meaning of progress.
Very topical, that particular
Yeah.
part there.
Mm-hmm. So dawned the time of storm undrummed. Storm and stress today rocks our little boat on the mad waters of the world sea. There is within and without the sound of conflict, the burning of body and rending of soul. Inspiration strives with doubt, with faith with vain questionings. The bright ideas of the past, physical freedom, political power, the training of brains and the training of hands, all these in turns have waxed and waned until even the last grows dim and overcast. Are they all wrong? All false? No, not that. But each alone was oversimple and incomplete. The dream of a credulous race childhood, or the fond imaginings of the other world which does not know and does not want to know our power. To be really true, all these ideals must be melded and welded into one. The training of the schools we need today more than ever. The training of deft hands, quick eyes and ears, and above all, the broader, deeper, higher culture of gifted minds and pure hearts. The power of the ballot we need is sheer self defense. Else, what shall save us from a second slavery? Freedom, too, the long sought, we still seek. The freedom of life and limb, the freedom to work and think, the freedom to love and inspire. Work, culture, liberty, all these we need, not singly, but together, not successively, but together, each growing and aiding each, and all striving toward the vaster ideal that swims before the Negro people, the ideal of human brotherhood, gained through the unifying ideal of race, the idea of fostering and developing the traits and talents of the Negro, not in opposition to or contempt for other races, but rather in large conformity to the greater ideals of the American Republic, in order to someday on American soil to world races may give each to each those characteristics both so sadly lack. We, the darker ones, come even now not altogether empty handed. There are today no truer exponents of the pure human spirit of the Declaration of Independence than the American Negroes. There is no true American music but the wild, sweet melodies of the Negro slave. The American fairy tales and folklore of are Indian and African. And all in all, we black men seem the sole oasis of simple faith and reverence in a dusty desert of dollars and smartness. Will America be poor if she replaced her brutus, dyspeptic, blundering with light-hearted but determined Negro humility? Or her coarse and cruel wit with loving, jovial good humor? Or her vulgar music with the soul of the sorrow songs? Merely a concrete test of the underlying principles of the great republic is the Negro problem, and the spiritual striving of the freedmen's sons is the travail of souls whose burden is almost beyond the measure of their strength, or who bear it in the name of an historic race, in the name of this, the land of their fathers' fathers, in the name of human opportunity.
Oh yeah, and that because this last little
Mm-hmm.
thing leads into the other
Right.
chapters and everything. But I like how at the end there, we pretty much said, the thing that we've been talking about a lot is
Mm-hmm.
that there is no right way, and there is no one way
Mm-hmm.
this is supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
You can't when you go. Let me see. When he talks about
Well.
the credulous race childhood that we
Mm-hmm.
existed in, it's that need to oversimplify
Mm-hmm.
the issue of the day, right? Or we make simple those things that are meant to be complicated,
Mm-hmm.
and we complicate those things that are
It
meant to
meant to
be
be
simple.
simple. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not. We don't need to be smart and skilled and determined
Mm-hmm.
in singular
That's
doses.
right.
These things have to all meld into one cohesive ideal
Mm-hmm.
of who we are trying to be,
Yeah, that
of
work,
that person
culture,
we're
liberty,
trying to be.
they all work together. And I remember talking about this a few times in this thing with unity and unifying, right?
Mhm.
Is that we're thinking, well, we have to do this first, and if we do this first, then we do this second. No, you know,
Or that we have to all think the same
Yeah, we
way.
all have to think the same way. We all have to be aligned, and that's not. We all have to work together. It's not
We
that we have to
all
all
have
have
to
to
be moving in the same
same
direction,
direction.
right? And it's like what we talked about with anarchy,
Hmm.
right? About the freedom, equality, solidarity,
Right.
right? And saying that anarchy it's not meant to be an answer. It's meant to be a new basis for us to create
Create
our
answers. Hmm.
answers. It's a shift in direction, right? Because as long as you're working from that basis of equality, freedom, solidarity, then whatever it is you create in that space is one that is going to be able to contribute to this new ideal of society.
Hmm.
And but this, right, the work, culture, liberty,
That's right.
that is all of the things that work together to create this new identity of self,
Hmm.
which is our work,
Right.
right? Which is the work we must undertake, that we have to undertake,
Undertake. Right.
for our own sakes, right? And like he said, like we said before, you know, yeah, exercise your power to vote for shared self
That's
defense.
right.
How else are we going to be able to defend against all
Hmm.
this stuff? So yeah, vote, do all these
Yes.
things. Like we
Do
said
those things.
before,
Right.
we're not saying not to vote.
Hmm.
We're not saying not to uh, um, engage
Hmm.
with society, but we are saying that our work is make sure that in engaging you don't become dependent.
Right.
Our work isn't to
Right.
fix this. Our
Right.
work is to replace it with
Right.
something better because there is no fixing this
Yes.
metric, right? Something is always going to have to occupy that
That's right.
imposed space,
Space.
whether it's
Hmm.
you or something or someone else.
Hmm.
And as long as that exists, there will always be this conversation.
Hmm.
It's always going to fall on someone else to
Hmm.
do that work,
Right.
just like it's falling on us now,
Hmm.
right? So it's not about fixing this system.
Hmm.
It's about replacing
Placing
it,
it.
moving in a new direction,
Hmm.
one that takes us away
Hmm.
from this, and one that also entails progress.
Hmm.
You know,
And we have to be intentional in that.
intentional in
In
that.
that. Hmm.
In the creation of this new self.
Hmm.
All of our work has to come from this basis of work, culture,
Culture
and
and.
liberty.
Hmm.
As long as you're working from that basis of what he said of self consciousness, self respect,
In self. In self.
self consciousness, self realization, and self respect.
Respect. Hmm.
As long as you're working from that,
Hmm.
as long as it's the work, culture, liberty, as long as you're working from that basis, then whatever direction you move in is
Hmm.
one that is uh, uh, conducive,
Hmm.
and one that is able to help to grow this new sense of self we're trying to create. But
Hmm.
understand that is the point.
Hmm.
That is what we're trying to do.
Right.
That is what all of this is about.
Hmm.
Because our struggle for democracy is the struggle for democracy,
Correct. Make
right?
right.
Our
Yes.
struggle for
That's right.
personhood, it is the struggle for personhood.
Personhood. Right.
There is no more American a story than our
Our
story.
story.
Our story is the American
Hmm.
story.
Like he says, like who who is the better representation of your Declaration of Independence?
Hmm.
You know, of any of what we are. We are.
I was striving.
Yeah,
Our
I
word.
was
So
striving. That's
our
right.
music, our culture, no matter
Yeah.
how you try to undepend it or
Hmm.
relegate it, or all the
Right.
ways you try to dress it up,
Yeah.
that is the American culture.
That's right.
Like you said, the Indian and African
Hmm.
stories,
Hmm.
all the stories of America,
Right.
right? And they go, back and beyond,
Hmm.
the introduction of, the white man into
Right.
this
Hmm.
conversation, right? But they do play a part in the creation of this new self,
Hmm.
right? But our part to play in this is to supersede this relegated space,
Hmm.
is to do more than escape it, but like I said, make it obsolete,
Hmm.
to make it impossible for that space to
Yes.
exist. Period.
Right. So
That is what we're
let me
doing.
read this last sentence
And yeah,
and now what I have briefly sketched in large outline, let me on coming pages tell again in many ways, with loving emphasis and deeper detail, that men may listen to the striving in the souls of black folk. And
so yeah.
I think the one thing that I hope that a lot of this conversation has also, lended itself is to the the clarifying of double consciousness.
Mm.
Because I would say for like the last 50, 60 years, maybe not even that long,
Mm-hmm.
but I know definitely in my lifetime, that that phrase has been misinterpreted for the longest time. And I feel like that a lot of you all have not really read what
Or internal.
or internalized what it is that he was trying to convey. It's not that we have a double consciousness, and the only way to make it is to walk, or to possess that. Is that it's just what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even in that, it's like we do have a double consciousness. We
In the
have,
sense, we have to have that in the sense because
this is the world that we're existing.
yeah,
This
it's
is the
not
context
it's not
that we are
it's not
existing.
of our doing. It's just what it is. We understand how we got here. We understand the story. We
Yeah,
we know
and if
this
you want to exist in that American context,
consciousness. Then that's what it
you will
is.
need a double consciousness, bro.
Yes,
It's the only way.
and guess what? But it's going. But it's like we say. It's like that magnet. It's a pole.
Nothing can exist there.
Nothing can exist.
Nothing
You
can
can't.
thrive.
Right. It's not. That's just what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, our reading and for folks who have followed along, that they have a different understanding of what it is he was trying to say, even
Yeah.
100+ years ago.
So, in conclusion, of the striving of the souls of Black folks,
Mhm.
our journey, right? Our journey in this. So, answering that problem,
Mhm.
how does it feel to be a problem, right? Answering that question is our soul striving,
Mhm.
right? We know how it feels in the moment,
Mhm.
right? When you realize, and all of the different things, all the different levels of realizing,
Mhm.
just how pervasive this mindset is. That it's not slavery.
That's right.
It's this,
Right.
and that
It's
slavery
black.
was a facet of your blackness.
Mhm.
And that it doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter what you do, you will be black.
Mhm.
And all of that lends itself toward answering that question.
Mhm.
How does it feel to be a problem? The one thing that people are too loath to ask,
Mhm.
because it takes too much out of the person
That's right.
meant
That's right.
to even enunciate that question.
Mhm.
Right? It's a very ugly truth,
Mhm.
but that's what it is. We are the problem. We are the remainder.
Mhm.
After everything has been so easily subdivided and put into its place, like it's like what James Baldwin said, we refuse to exist in that space,
That's right.
space relegated to us.
Mhm.
We continue to invade
Right.
all those other spaces,
Yeah.
and when that happens, it leads to this.
Even in the
In this,
framework that has been imposed upon us, the way that others view us, right? We constantly lend ourselves to making you all, I'm gonna say, liars. How James Baldwin mentioned is that every time you try to frame us in a particular way, we always fall out of that. And so now you have to reframe
because
it,
like I said, and it leads to that. Like I said, it
that
leads that
dissonance.
dissonance, right? And it leads to that. It leads to this madness.
Mm-hmm.
You can't put a people in a box.
Right.
You can't do it to us. We can't do it to you.
Mm-hmm.
It will always fail
Mm-hmm.
to truly enunciate or explain what we are.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. It's
Right.
impossible. But when you're trying to regiment, when you're trying to optimize,
Mm-hmm.
especially with this flawed, logic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a different F word I was going to use, but
Right.
with this flawed logic that you have, you're not going to get anywhere with
Right.
that. But our work,
Mm-hmm.
our work isn't the work of, like you say, closing the wealth gap and
That's
doing
right.
all that stuff. That's not our work.
That's not our work. That's right.
Our work is reconciling,
Mm-hmm.
this truth.
Mm-hmm.
Not with, we're not trying to reconcile the American with, the black.
Right. No.
Right?
Right.
It's trying to reconcile the black, the American with who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a third element. We're not really American. We're not really black. The one thing we really, really are are human beings. And all of the cultural backlog that we use to describe our humanity is the necessary language that we need to speak in to be able to enunciate this new being into being, right? To really be able to describe what this experience has made us into. You can't refute it.
Right.
You can't ignore it. Like I said, you have to walk with
We
it.
have to walk with it.
Because it's there. And that space that we exist in, it's there.
Right.
But to make it obsolete, to inoculate yourself, you have to be able to see beyond the American, see beyond the black, to that thing that you really are. It's composed of those pieces, but it's something more.
And
as
it's just like, it's just like where W.E.B. Du Bois mentioned that, at that time when we thought we're slaves, that's the thing we gotta come from out of. We come from out of everything and we find that you realize it's not just that. And so for us, when we say, being, a human being, you have to understand, because he used the term like half men and stuff like that, right? That we were caught in a frame where we weren't even considered people. You understand what I'm saying? So when we talk about being a human being, we're not talking about,
being recognized as human,
right,
in their particular thing.
Exactly.
No, like I said, it's beyond the American,
right.
beyond the black. It's beyond the pale, if you would.
Yes, right. That's right. That's what
It's
he said,
beyond all those things. And whatever that thing is, as long as it is created from a basis of work, culture, and liberty, right? For us, that's
right.
the cornerstone for us,
right?
Right? For those people we would call black, that's what we need. We need
And those
the
things
work,
have to work
the culture,
together.
and liberty. And
They
those,
work
as
together.
long as those things have been melded, right? And as long as it's from that basis, whatever thing you end up being is true.
That's right.
Right? And that person, whatever that person, needs to exist in the world, outside of this one as well.
Sure.
Right? Because, but in doing that, like I said before, the light doesn't battle the darkness because the darkness isn't a thing. It dispels it.
Right.
That's all it does. Effortlessly, without even trying, gets rid of the darkness because the darkness isn't anything. And that's what this is. It is shedding light into that darkness, dispelling the myth.
That's right.
Of what you are, and being able to show what you show yourself to be.
Yeah.
So yeah. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments, and thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.